Hello everyone. My name is Elise and welcome to the vlog. I hope you're all doing so good today. We're kicking off the start of my International Booker Prize vlog for 2025. I'm not going to be reading all of the books on the long list. That's just not my style. I'm only going to be reading the books that I'm really interested in, but the list is banging this year. I know so many people have been saying this and I thoroughly agree. This list is so interesting. I love all of the small presses. I think there's 11 small presses total, which is breaking the record for the amount of small independent presses that have been on there. And a ton of the premises sound interesting. So I'm going to be picking, I don't even know how many up and giving you my thoughts on them. So if you haven't already seen the books that are nominated, I will put a link down to the nominations below so you can check that out. But I'm just gonna be talking about the books that I'm most interested in. So the ones that I know I'm going to be reading are two so far. One of them I already own, so I know I'm gonna be reading it, and that is On the Calculation of Volume 1. And this one's published by New Directions in the US. What language is that? So it's translated from the Danish. Many people have been talking about this. Plan Septology. This is the first in the collection, and it is a repeating day novel. So our protagonist is repeating the day over and over again and figuring out new meaning with having to repeat the days. I'm really excited to read this, and it is the only one I own, so I'll definitely be getting to this one. The other one I know I'll be reading because I have already read it is Hunchback by Saou Ichikawa. I'm not going to review that quite yet. I'll be reviewing that in a second. But yeah, already read that one. I'll let you know my thoughts. The other books that I'm interested in picking up are Perfection, which I have a hold at the library for. That's going to be a recurring theme, so I'm waiting for that to come in. I also have a hold at the library for Eurotrash, and lastly I have a hold at the library for Reservoir Bitches. So those ones actually have decently long waits. There's a little bit of variation, but it's kind of long. So I'm just gonna see which holds come in by the time I want this video to go out, and that will sort of dictate how many that I'm reading. The other book that I really want to read is Small Boat, but that is not available at my library. So we're gonna see if I end up breaking down and buying that book or not. Who knows? And that's because it has not come out in the US yet. I don't know if it has plans to come out in the US, so I would need to import it if I wanted to read that one. But the premise does sound very interesting. And again, I will say that the list as a whole, fascinating. That I could make an argument to read any book on this list, but these are the ones that I'm being drawn to the most. And honestly, if I love all of these books, I'll probably continue throughout the rest of the year trying to pick up some of the other ones. I've contemplated reading Solenoid for so long. In the US, that book is published by Deep Vellum, which is one of my favorite independent publishers. But that premise does concern me a little bit. It's outside of the scope of my reading, but Deep Vellum has really championed that book a lot. When I went to go visit the store in Dallas, the person that was working even mentioned that book to me. So I don't know, that one I waffle back and forth on. I'm definitely not going to read it in this video, but I might try and read it later in the year. So let's go ahead and quickly talk about Hunchback. And I say quickly because this is a very short book. It's under 100 pages. I listened to the audiobook. Again, I'm trying to get a lot of these from the library to keep my purchasing habits realistic and then just buy the ones that I thoroughly love. This one is translated from the Japanese by Polly Barton, and in the US I can't remember off the top of my head who this is published by. I will put that down below. And I listened to the audiobook of this one, and I would definitely recommend the audiobook. The audiobook has slight production-like elements that tie in the disability that our protagonist has. So our protagonist has a spine curvature that significantly impacts her mobility, and she lives in a care facility. This novel is really talking about the interplay between our fantasy lives and our real lives, and particularly the role that that might play with marginalized identities. And there's kind of a host of marginalized identities that this book is talking about. The one that's definitely at the forefront is disability or mobility issues, how that impacts impacts your relationship to your body, what you can do with your body, the types of experiences that you are allowed to have or allowed to even opt into or want to have. And that's how it starts bleeding into fantasy life. So our protagonist has imagined a really elaborate, in-depth fantasy life that plays out in some ways through writing erotic fiction that's published in various platforms online. Sorry, I look different. I had to move. My leg is so sore and I needed to shift around, but you don't need to know that. So the platform that's really interesting is not even where she's publishing the erotic fiction, but she has a Twitter account, RIP Twitter. On the Twitter account, she publishes these really controversial one-off comments. And one of the ones that we're focusing in on is her desire to get pregnant and have an abortion. All of her online content is viewed by one of the workers at the care facility, and he strikes up kind of a deal with her to help enact some of her fantasies. That's all I'm going to give you about the plot because that's all the blurb gives you. But, you know, really the plot is just a vehicle to get some of these messages out. So the plot is secondary to what's going on here. Now, this care worker is really interesting because our main protagonist is extremely wealthy. Her parents were wealthy, left her with a shit ton of money, and our care worker is really poor. So he has his own kind of marginalization that butts up really interestingly against our protagonist's mobility issues. And I thought that discussion was really well done. Like, everybody has these areas in which they're marginalized, some more than others, but everybody has something. And I think this book explores the ways that those marginalizations impact our daily lives. And I just really thoroughly enjoyed that. I thought this was really punchy. It was the perfect length for what it was trying to do. It could be a little bit kind of like shocking because it was so short, and was able to tackle some really interesting issues about identity and the way that our fantasy lives really press against these marginalized parts of us. And I just loved that concept. It made me think about some things for myself and like, what are the things that I might dream of or want or desire in my life? And how are those impacted about the parts of my identity that are in a more marginalized space? So really fascinating all around. I would thoroughly recommend it. And again, it's so short that for the amount of time and effort you put in, you get a lot out of this. So that was a great read. Quick note to wrap back around on the audio production. So our protagonist has to communicate mainly through a computer. So you get a lot of those sounds in the audiobook production. So you're getting kind of like the tapping, clicking related sounds. You're getting some of the audio voiced through a computer AI generated voice. And I did think that added to my reading experience of it. So that's why I would recommend the audiobook. So that is Hunchback. I will check back in with you when I've started, finished, DNF'd the next book, and we'll go from there. Bye. All right, I'm back with an update for you all. I have finished another book and I have DNF'd a different book. So I'm not doing a great job of giving you like midway updates of these, but in my defense, they're very short. So I think it might work better for you, but you let me know. So the book that I have finished is Perfection. This is by Vincenzo Latronico, translated by Sophie Hughes. Is this from Italian or Spanish? This one's translated from the Italian, but also no, Sophie Hughes translates from Spanish as well. So girl is crushing the game, absolutely. This one's published by New York Review Books, and this book is really interesting. I had such a kind of wide range of experience while I was reading this. I think this book is the definition of millennial malaise, or like millennial ennui, whatever word you like better. That is really all this book is about. It's not really about the character work. It's not really about the plot. It's really about this idea, or maybe phenomenon, that I think is really common with millennials. This idea of feeling a bit lost, maybe not understanding what your purpose is, feeling like there needs to be something more. This book is just the dictionary definition of what that idea is like. So we're following our main couple. They are expats living in Berlin. They work in graphic design, kind of. They work from home, and they moved to Berlin in a time where they're kind of just before this wave of gentrification that happens in Berlin, that essentially they are early adopters of. And again, we already start getting into this kind of roundabout discussion of everything being morally gray, right? Everything is morally gray, and we're maybe always trying to seek this ideal that we can do something purely, and that doesn't really exist anymore. Did it ever exist? I don't know, but it definitely doesn't exist now. So we follow them, and they over time continue to become disillusioned, sort of with the changing of the city itself. And this is a novel that just follows everyday mundanity over and over again to really settle you in to that malaise that happens with routine over a long period of time. And at some point we have kind of a vacation / temporary move. There's things happening plot-wise, but it doesn't really matter. It could almost be anywhere, and that's sort of the point. On the one hand, right, reading this book that really is just about an idea and nothing else, I'm like, okay, did it do enough for me to forego all of these other elements of a novel that I would typically want to be there? I don't know. We're gonna consider. So let me tell you a little bit more about this book before I make a decision, if I'm gonna make one at all, honestly. I think the prose in this novel is really tied into what idea it's trying to represent. So this prose is very matter of fact. The sentences transition really well into each other, and it almost becomes list-like. So the cadence feels very like ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. Like sentences run into each other, even though they're not run-on sentences, but they run into each other with a very rhythmic-like cadence. And I think that matches what the book is trying to represent. It's sort of trying to lull you, and you do want to keep reading because you get in that rhythm with it. So I thought that was smart for what the book was trying to do, even though on a sentence by sentence basis, it's not going to be like the most beautiful sentence you've ever read, but the prose matches with the book. This book is also trying to, I think, partially tackle social media culture and parasocial relationships and this idea of beautification through social media. There is some conversations about our main couple in the novel posting on social media and posting definitely a more glamorized version of their life than how they're actually feeling. And I think that commentary has sort of been there, done that. We've said it before. I don't think there's anything new coming out of this, but it does at least fit well with this idea of millennial malaise. I think online presence is definitely a part of that for millennials. And this book did make it onto the shortlist, which is really interesting because Hunchback, the book I read previously, which I think in my mind I sort of feel like I liked better, did not make it onto the shortlist. And I was doing some reflection on why I think that might be. And I will say, I do think Perfection would stand up very well to a reread. For the International Booker judges, before they determine the shortlist, they reread the long list again and then come up with a shortlist. And I do think Perfection is a really good book to reread. And for that reason alone, I could see it making it to the shortlist. Whereas upon first impression, it might not be everyone's favorite. There is a lot of subtext in that book. I do think it pays off for a second read. Whereas Hunchback, I think, relies heavily on the element of surprise that it gets with the first time reader. And I don't know how well that book would hold up to a reread, at least not in quick succession. I think it would hold up really well to a reread kind of a couple years later. But in quick succession, I question whether or not it would stand up as strong as Perfection would. So I sort of have talked myself into maybe that being the reason why Hunchback is not there and Perfection is, even though I think I enjoyed Hunchback better. So those are my maybe somewhat confusing thoughts on Perfection. Let me know what you thought of Perfection if you read it, and how you feel about this reread theory that I'm throwing out there. Let's talk about the book that I DNF'd. The book that I DNF'd was Eurotrash by Christian Kracht. Is that his name? This is translated from the German by Daniel Bowles. And I do think this book suffered in that it's the one I picked up after Perfection, because there are some similarities between the two books. Definitely in the narrative voice, but the characters are similar. They're in a similar phase of life. They're in a similar emotional state of discontent. And I do think it was just too close to Perfection for me to really feel like it was worth a shot. But the other thing that bothered me about Eurotrash is the tangled nature of the storytelling. So we're getting a lot of back and forth, tangential prose, and it just wasn't my favorite. So I decided, hey, I got no skin in the game. These are library books. I'm just gonna put it down. So I, in fact, did put Eurotrash down. I think also I was influenced that I've heard other people talking about Eurotrash and it's gotten really mixed reviews. So if I'm already not loving the writing style, it's probably better for me to just kind of quit while I'm ahead. So I only got maybe 25 pages into that book and then I DNF'd it. So that one has been a DNF. That's my update on my International Booker Prize reading so far. I am going to read 2 more books. I now know how many books I will be reading for this, one of which I have started and one I am about to start, but I will wait to talk about those until the next update because we have been here a while, my friends. So I will see you in just a second. Bye. All right, friends, I have an update for you, and it is another completed book. So, you know, it is what it is. Next up, I read Small Boat. This is by Vincent Delecroix, and it's translated by Helen Stevenson, published by Hope Road, which is a really fascinating publisher, by the way. I would highly encourage you to check them out. They do a lot of Caribbean literature. Their mission statement was very well done. So look up Hope Road. This book was on the shortlist, and I should say, since I've talked to you last, the winner has been announced. The winner was Heart Lamp. Bum ba da bum. I am not going to read that book. that one I'm less interested in, even though it won, but I'm sure it's fantastic. It's a short story collection, and it is the first short story collection to win in a very long time, I believe, and it's the first book to have ever been nominated, let alone won, from the Kannada, which is a dialect from India, I believe. Big ups for a new language winning for the first time. So let's get back to Small Boat. Small Boat is another really, really slim novel, just over 100 pages, I think, like 120 or something like that. It's in 3 parts. And the 3 parts are really important together. This is another one of those books where I do feel like you need to read to the end. The first part, I was like, what are we doing? I'm not really sure. Then you get the second part, it starts making a little bit more sense. Then you get the third part, it makes even more sense. The POVs shift a little bit between the parts. I don't think it's giving anything away to say that, like, we start with a POV, then in part 2 we change POV, then in part 3 we go back to the first POV that we were in. It is about an incident that did happen in real life, although this is a fictionalized version of it, in which there was a dinghy boat that had 29 people, 29 immigrants who were traveling from France to England. So they were traversing the channel, which takes about 90 minutes to traverse, and their dinghy started to fail and started to sink. And they were making distress calls to both the English and French kind of like rescue authorities. They have different organizations to contact, and they keep getting pinged back and forth because they're right on the border between French and English waters. Kind of this throwing the buck or the responsibility on the other entity. And it tells you from the beginning, and there is an introduction at the beginning of this book that will also include this, that 27 of the immigrants die and only 2 survive. So we're investigating what has happened, who's responsible, and really a lot of moral questioning. There's a lot of moral questioning in this book of right and wrong, what complicity is, who bears just responsibility. And all of that was very fascinating. I think the formatting of the 3 parts and the kind of POV back and forth does pack a punch, even though it's not pleasant to be in the POVs, particularly like the first and third, but all of it in different ways. It is unpleasant to be in that character's head, but it felt very real to be inside of their head. I get why a lot of people have really been enjoying this. I think this was so smartly done. And I think it does really have a lot to say about not just immigration in general or the immigration experience, but also what the discourse ends up being about the immigration experience, and how so many people will put energy into judging how other people are responding to it instead of putting energy into helping. That is a central point that this book is trying to make, of use your energy to actually help. That's what's important. At least that's what I took away from it. I think that really resonates living in the US, what's going on in our political system right now, where you're just constantly flooded with like horrific shit that's happening in the country. And I do think we need to make decisions on, like, are you going to spend your time arguing with people online about it, or are you going to spend your time actually trying to help the causes that you want to help? And I know I'm saying, you know, I'm in the US and I'm relating it to my own experience, but that could be, you know, lots of different experiences all over the world. Yeah, this book was really well done. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thoroughly glad that I read it. Do think it's a great book for making you think and hopefully trying to change some of your behaviors as well. And I love it when a book really is trying to send a strong message like that. Even better when it does it successfully, which I think this did it successfully in my opinion. So that was Small Boat. So the last book that I'm going to be reading for this video, I'll talk about really quick because I have started it. That is On the Calculation of Volume 1. This is by Salvej, Balle, translated by Barbara Haveland, and published by New Directions. I'm only 25 pages into this, so very early days, but it is short, like all the other ones that I've read for this video. The narrator's voice is intriguing. You probably already know this by now. Well, one, this didn't win either. It was on the short list, but it did not win either. But it is a Groundhog Day novel, so our main narrator is repeating the same day over and over and over. We're starting with her on the 121st version of that day. Drops you in such a fascinating way. I love that you get dropped in well into the cycle because she's already like locked in, like she's over it, she's over repeating it. She tries to have the day in like the best way that she can at this point. Drops in these little clues about her life in such a seamless way. It's really well done. So you find out very quickly in the beginning that her marriage is kind of estranged. It's very logistical. It's giving roommate at this time, but she doesn't just straight up tell you that. You see that in the actions that the narrator makes of constantly avoiding her husband on this day. She goes out of her way to avoid him. So really thoroughly enjoying the writing style so far. And I'm hoping it will just be more of the same. From the reviews that I've seen, it sounds like it is going to be more of the same, and can't wait to keep going. So this is a book that I'm reading physically at the moment. I will check back in with you probably when I finish it, is my best guess. I'll see you then. Okay people, we have read and finished the last book of this vlog, and that is On the Calculation of Volume 1. This is by Salvej, Balle, and translated from the Danish by Barbara Haveland, published by New Directions. I had started this in the last check-in, but I think I had only read the first 50, 60 pages, something like that. The second half of this book, I think, is better, significantly better than the first half. The first half, it's a little bit info dumpy for me. So the first 2 chapters, or days like 121 and 122 that she's reliving the day, are very long. I think they're like 30 pages each at least. And that's really because you're getting the backlog of days. So even though she's starting there, she goes back in time and kind of shows you a lot of the significant days leading up until that point. I just wasn't sure if she's doing that to really like bog us down in the beginning and make us feel some of the drudgery of living the same day over and over again that the main character is experiencing, or if it was a way for us to just like provide the information that we maybe needed to have for the character, for the context, to start off at this point. And if that was the case, then I was a little bit of like, I don't feel like that was 100% successfully executed. And really, like, it's probably a combination of both. So that was the only part that I didn't love about this book. Once we get into the second half, it really shines. And I think we get such unique commentary and such unique inner monologues for our main character, who's Tara Selter, that's her name. And yeah, we just keep reliving this day with her. There was a section I was reading near the end where she's talking about cloud formations. And I had this thought of like, how did she think of this? Like, she must have put herself in a position where she in fact tried to relive days over and over and just saw what came to her mind. Like, I had that very conscious thought while I was reading that section. And then I looked at the back of the book again to see what was in the blurb to make sure I didn't do any spoilers. And I looked at some of the author blurbs, and the third author blurb on the back says, the Danish novelist went into exile on an island for more than 20 years to write On the Calculation of Volume, which has become an international phenomenon. And I was like, wait, what? Did the author actually go into isolation to see like what type of thoughts would come up, like this philosophical experiment? I have not fact checked that. I will be doing that at some point, but if the blurb is correct, that is such commitment to a project. And I do think really shows, because I had the thought of like, someone must have tried to live through this, because there's no other way. Like, why would she pull that specific fact out? And yet, if you're looking for these small changes, if you're looking for newness in a day that feels eternally the same, clouds would be an excellent way to do that, right? It's like a minutia that we don't often pay attention to in our everyday life, but could contain so much fascination if we really spent time on it. And we get in that pattern a lot. And I think that's the magic of this book. I definitely get why a lot of people want to read the next one fairly quickly. And I do want to get to the next one sometime this year, so I will be picking that up at some point. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's such an interesting book to put yourself in, to think about what you would do, to get to know this character who does hold the story pretty well. And I can see why this has been one of the kind of crowd favorites amongst the International Booker longlisted books. It is one of my favorites that I've read from this project. I've only read 5 of them, so not even half, and this is definitely up there. So my journey with the International Booker Prize has been extremely enriching, rewarding, challenging at some points. And if I had to do a final ranking on the books that I read for this video, I really have like a top 3. My favorites are Hunchback, Small Boat, and On the Calculation of Volume. They feel fairly even at the top for me. If I had to pick one, I think I would say Hunchback. I just think that accomplishes what it's trying to do so perfectly. It's covering a lot in a very short book, but doing it well. And I really enjoyed my reading experience of that. Probably Small Boat comes in second for me. This comes in slight third, mainly because of the first section. I think if the second book kind of picks up right where we left off and it's more of the same, that book I will like better, and I could see giving it 5 stars. So strong hopes for that one, but this one, did fail me a little bit in the beginning. And then I would put Perfection in 4th after that. And then lastly, I would put Eurotrash because I DNF'd that book. So that has been my ride with the International Booker Prize. Hopefully you've had a good time tagging along with me. Please let me know what you thought of any of these books. If you've read them or you just heard other content creators talk about them and you have some opinions, I'd love to hear that. Who knows, maybe I'll read more International Booker books throughout the year. But I do think this was a really strong year for International Booker. So many interesting titles, and how lovely that the new language was the winner this year. So yay for everyone involved. and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.